Welcome to the Leigh-on-Sea History Channel, where we walk the seashore of the past.
The earliest inhabitants of Leigh probably lived in wooden shacks, which, as the settlement expanded, clustered together on the thin sliver of land between the cliffs and the shoreline of the Thames. As the old town developed, the High Street, once simply known as The Street, was for many years the only street in the entire parish. The street ran between the earliest houses and began at its eastern end as it does today near the Bell Wharf, although the current wharf was only constructed in the 19th century, as indeed were many of the remaining Old Town buildings. How large the Old Town grew during its Tudor peak is largely a matter of conjecture. It is possible that the hills west of Billet Lane were once built on. Those wishing to gain access to the village from the church at the top of Horse Hill, now known as Leigh Hill, made their way down this ancient roadway to where the former Ship Inn still stands. Turning left here, one would have found oneself in the marketplace, now lost beneath the railway tracks and the footbridge, which replaced an earlier level crossing. The closure of the level crossing ended access to the old town from Leigh Hill, a route that had been in use for over 1,000 years. Two events changed the face of the medieval village forever. The first were the changes made to the town plan by the Reverend Robert Eden between the years 1837 and 1847. The second was the arrival of the railway in 1854, which cut through the heart of Old Leigh. Before this, footpaths established over many centuries headed north up the steep hill to meet the long-vanished Chess Lane. And of these original paths, only one, Billet Lane, remains in almost its original form. The others disappeared at the time of Reverend Eden, and in the late 19th century, urban development saw the emergence of the streets we know today. Billet Lane is almost entirely overlooked by most residents and tourists, but the steep hill affords a great view of the estuary, and as we will discover in an upcoming video about Leigh's Tudor and Stuart mariners, Billet Lane has some rather illustrious ghosts. That anything of the old town remains is down to last-ditch conservation efforts by local residents, who saved a remnant of the ancient village in the 1970s from Southend Council, who had already demolished a great many historic properties as part of their plan to build a road to the west and a massive harbour between Chalkwell and Leigh stations. Fortunately, we have photographs of some of these lost buildings from the Tudor period. In his Pictorial History of Old Leigh, published in 1978, John F. Bundock described the old town at that time as being in a state of more or less dereliction. In the 20th century, the former agricultural land at the top of the hill had by 1978 been almost completely covered with thousands of houses in the growing town at the top of the hill, as slowly the population dwindled in the isolated historic remnant. Bundock's book contains a numbered map that was drawn from a survey made circa 1845, just 9 years before the railway barged its way through the village, forever separating the old town from the hill to the north. We will refer to this map as we make our way east to west along the High Street to compare what is and what once was. Near today's beach, just east of the former railway station building, now home to Leigh Sailing Club, stood the intriguingly named Match Corner House, numbered 10 by Bundock on his map. Nothing, not even a photograph, remains of this building, which was demolished to make way for the railway in 1854. The structure shown on the map just to the left of Match Corner House was the original 18th century Bell Inn. This stood at the bottom of a narrow road that led from the wharf up to Leigh Hill, roughly in line with the glass balcony at the east end of the sailing club. In the 18th century, this forgotten access road once saw up to a dozen stagecoaches a day clatter down its slope and pull up out the front of the Old Bell Coaching Inn as it collected passengers en route for London, while the local fishermen and shopkeepers went about their daily business. This, like Leigh Hill, was another very ancient access to the Old Town High Street. Some recent images taken from the northern end of this little street, from Leigh Hill, add a little context. This image, captured in March 2009, shows the corner of the derelict mid-Victorian Bell Hotel on the right. However, before the railway was constructed, the original Bell Inn stood down the slope on the right, beyond the railway tracks, facing directly onto the High Street. This tiny access entrance, now called Bell Sands, is all that remains of this ancient street that long predated the arrival of the railway, let alone today's modern gated housing complex. This photo of the rear of the Bell Hotel gives an idea of the old road coming down the hill and was taken shortly before work began on Bell Sands. This much older photo, circa 1904, taken from Bell Wharf, shows the metal footbridge that once crossed the railway track at the foot of this old road. The Bell Hotel stood derelict for many years, and this neglect led to its eventual collapse in 2015. Seen here in 1978, the then 123-year-old Bell Hotel was at this time in use as a hostel. The Bell Hotel was bought by Arthur Wilkins after the Second World War, and it remained in his family into the 1970s. Wilkins owned other properties on Lee Hill and opened J&A's bathroom shop just to the left of the hotel. By April 2021, the old Bell Hotel had been replaced after its collapse by a similar-looking building. J&A's bathroom shop at 24A Lee Hill has long gone, but the Victorian building that housed it, built in 1901, is just about standing as of 2023. Walk out onto Bell Wharf today and the bricks and building rubble from the original Bell Inn will be beneath your feet, having been reused in 1854 during the construction of the wharf that replaced the former King's Strand. The Bell Inn and the later Bell Hotel were owned by William Wells and Isaac Perry, brewers and wine merchants of Chelmsford, who received £1,800 compensation from the London, Tilbury and Southend Railway Company for the land on which the original Bell stood. The railway company agreed to let the front rooms of the old Bell Inn remain standing so their tenant, Sarah Joscelyne, could continue trading until the new Bell was built. Sarah's husband John had been the tenant until his death in 1840, and his widow was therefore tenant at both the old and the new inns. The second Bell cost £364 to build and opened in 1854. On the right of this photo, taken at the head of Bell Wharf, we see the former railway station that is now home to Leigh Sailing Club. This was in fact the second of Leigh's 3 railway stations and was in use between the years 1910 and 1933. The first was erected in 1854, further down the High Street, opposite where the Smack Inn stands today. The third and current station was opened in 1933 at the west of the town. The fishermen seen here are gathered around the town's second well, sunk in 1836 on land granted by Lady Olivia Sparrow. It was 249 feet deep, 24 feet of which was bricked. Analysis of a survey conducted by the Rivers Commission Laboratory in 1871 showed both wells were contaminated by sewage. Despite this, the well remained in use until the 1920s. This is the area today, although don't look for the iconic Fishermen's Cooperative building on the extreme left of this photo, where Francis A. Turnage, the sailmaker, worked from 1894 to 1964. It mysteriously caught fire in September 2019 and has since been demolished. The Old Town community was for many years based around the previously mentioned marketplace, numbered 7 on Bundock's map. Today, if one were to sit at the tables beneath the footbridge, opposite the Mayflower Public House, you would be in the area where the market was once held. Turn away from the previously mentioned pub on the south side of the street and look north across the tracks at the former Ship Inn. Then turn east towards Leigh Sailing Club and try to imagine that in this area between these buildings was the place where the medieval Leigh Fair was held on the second Tuesday of every May. Stall holders were required to pay a fee of 3 old pence per foot frontage for their stalls to the lord of the manor. The majority of the old town's day-to-day trade once also took place here, although the town was never officially granted a market charter. In this location you are, incidentally, sitting exactly where the town's old signal box and level crossing used to be. In this photograph, taken on the north side of the railway, the left half of the building, now occupied by the Mayflower, is in the centre, and its distinctive arched doorway can clearly be seen, giving us the ability to work out the position of the signal box, its footbridge and the level crossing. This was the point at which historically Lee Hill once met Market Square and entered the High Street. This is roughly the same view today. The building to the far left and the attic over the arch in the old photo have long since vanished. Beyond the arch was the Victoria Wharf, which in 1978 looked like this and was then known as Knapp's Yard. Today, most of this area is a car park, as is roughly a fifth of the original old town. This photo captures a moment in history almost 100 years ago on the 10th of August 1923. It was taken from the bedroom of Frank Bridges in what was then the old post office. It shows local people demonstrating against the railway's proposed closure of the level crossing. They are doing this by showing the volume of horse and foot traffic. The building on the left is the signal box. The Ship Inn can clearly be seen across the tracks, which helps us establish the position of the level crossing. Once the level crossing was sealed off, it eventually led to the construction of the ugly flyover at the town's western end in the late 1950s. Sadly, the Leigh Society who saved the old town were unsuccessful in banning cars, which was another of their aims. Viewed from the old signal box in the late 50s and early 60s, the building on the left is easily recognisable as today's sailing club. It is so clearly a railway station building that many who arrive at today's modern station to the west of the old town probably think it was the original. As with many things connected with Leigh, there is more to the story than meets the eye, and as we have seen, this building erected in 1910 was actually the old town's second station. The story of the railway in Leigh will be explained in part 2 of the Old Town High Street. As we look at this second railway station, we now go back in time to see how things looked before its construction. Only the buildings to the right are still standing today and are in use as the Mayflower pub. The cottages are gone, and the King's Head, number 8 on Bundock's map, was demolished circa 1910 to make way for the station. The King's Head stood on the south-eastern corner of the old marketplace and was built in 1740 to replace a former public house, also called the King's Head, that was used as a private dwelling between 1671 and 1720. It is possible that this first building was originally constructed for one of the wealthy mariners who lived in Leigh when it was a prosperous port. When rebuilt, the inn was originally called the Angel, but reverted to the name King's Head in 1766. This remarkable-looking photograph, looking west, was taken from the footbridge that crossed the tracks by Bell Wharf. It shows the row of old cottages and the Smack Inn on the extreme left, and just beyond them Juniper's cottage. The two buildings centre left are the rear of the King's Head. The white part originally entirely filled the gap created by the railway, and this constituted the original inn. The dark part was once a home owned by a Mr. Wilkins, but eventually became part of the inn. All the buildings on the right have long since vanished, and the area is now part of a car park beside Bell Sands. This photo, circa late 1950s, shows the proximity of the signal box to the buildings that are now the Mayflower. Beyond them is the Smack Inn, which still stands today. The original Smack once stood on the opposite side of the High Street, facing the Thames, until it too was scheduled for demolition to make way for the railway. One Alfred Joseph Hardcastle bought the original Smack, which included in the sale a parcel of land opposite the old pub that was previously used for boat building. It was here Hardcastle rebuilt the Smack in its current location in the 1850s. This photo, taken circa 1920, shows the same scene, but beyond the Smack Inn we can still see Juniper's shop on the left, which is also seen in this photo taken around the same time. Juniper's was one of the best known of all the Old Town buildings before the destruction of most of the High Street, and became known as Juniper's Cottage at the end of the 19th century, when Joe Juniper sold fish displayed on a stall out the front. It was originally one dwelling connected to the adjoining houses, but had been divided at some point. The date, 1589, was discovered carved on a stone in one of its walls. This process of division into smaller dwellings happened to all the houses originally built by wealthy Elizabethan mariners as the town's fortunes declined in the 18th century. The shopfront was added when it became F. Barrett's butcher's shop, but was a fishmonger's when it was photographed here in the 1930s. Originally, the upper story projected over the ground floor for the entire length of the building. It is said that the artist John Constable stayed here while painting his famous picture of Hadleigh Castle. It is known that his uncle Thomas Constable once owned the property, so there may be some truth in this local legend. Sadly, this historic building was destroyed by the council in 1952. All but one of the buildings on the right of the photo were also demolished. Let us take a closer look at the vanished buildings seen here. Number 1 on the far left is probably the eastern wall of the historic Crown Inn, built in the 1550s, that stood at the head of Strand Wharf. Although a map of 1876 shows this building in use as Mr. H. Thompson's draper's shop. It began life as a private house, but was licensed to sell alcohol in the 17th century, and in the reign of Elizabeth was owned by Captain Thomas Hare. The building appears to have survived Juniper's cottage, albeit briefly, and it remained standing until the late 1950s. There was an inn under the name The Crown on this site as far back as 1406, when Henry IV took refreshments here, having crossed to Leigh from the Isle of Sheppey. The inn entertained Lady Frances Grey, mother of Lady Jane Grey, for one night in 1554, when she fled England from Leigh. Embedded in the western wall of the Customs House are the remains of an old fireplace that are said to have once belonged to this building. Today, the site of the Crown Inn is a car park. The Customs House is just visible, marked number 2. Erected in 1815 on the site of the original Customs House, by 1856 this building was being used by the railway company. Somewhat remarkably, it still exists and allows us to place the other buildings. Number 3 was known locally as Cook's Place and had formerly been one house that was later divided into 3 tenements. By the time of this photo, taken in the 1930s, it had been Tudorised as Ye Cosy Cafe, although images exist of it in its original weather-boarded state. Dr. John Cook, who once lived here, gave hospitality to John Wesley on at least one occasion when he came to preach in the Old Town in the 18th century. In 1867, Philip Benton wrote in his History of the Rochford 100,
"The house where Dr. Cook resided in Leigh is still extant. It is some centuries old and one of the tallest in the village. It is situated near the middle pump on the south side of the railway."
The middle pump probably refers to the well sunk in 1832, situated nearby on the Strand. Building number 4, the Old Town Tea and Dining Rooms, is a bit of a mystery. Carol Edwards, in her book The Old Town, states that a refreshment room stood here as early as 1908 and that by 1925 Philip Parsons and his wife Bessie owned the building and ran the Galleon restaurant here. Edwards reproduces a photo of Parsons' son's wedding outside the building in 1930. Photos of the Old Town from the 1880s and 90s show a much smaller building in this location. Later ones, this much larger property that is trying very hard to look Tudor. It was either an extension of the original older building or was a new structure, perhaps built in 1908. Whatever its origins, it was gone by the late 1940s, as was number 5. In the 1880s, this shop was a butcher's owned by the Brewer family, who served the Old Town from here for 40 years. The Brewer's shop was opposite Juniper's cottage and right next door to the very first Old Town station, seen here in this photo taken in the 1880s. In the distance, number 3 Cook's Place can be seen when it was still weatherboarded. The Brewer's shop, number 5, is the same, but number 4, the Old Town Tea and Dining Rooms, or the Galleon restaurant, is clearly very different. This photo was taken after the war, some time before 1952, and shows Juniper's cottage and Cook's Place remaining, but the first station, Brewer's butcher shop, and the Old Town Tea and Dining Rooms have gone. A few years after this, in the late 50s, tragically, both Juniper's cottage and Cook's Place have also gone. All the original buildings on the left up to the Strand were also demolished. Today, the same area looks like this. To the left, the white weather-boarded building mimics the lost Juniper's cottage, although it appears to be a little further west than the original. Nothing opposite remains at all until one reaches the Customs House, because, yes, it's a car park. We finish this video with an aerial overview of the places we have discussed during the video. This photograph was taken in 1930, just before the council began their demolition in earnest. From right to left, number 1 is the rear view of the Bell Hotel. Number 2 is the old access road that is now Bell Sands. Number 3 is the vanished footbridge over the railway. Number 4 is the second railway station, and at this time it was still in use. Number 5 is the Bell Wharf. Number 6 is the recently lost Fisherman's Co-op building, but was then in use by sailmaker Francis Turnage. Number 7 is the Mayflower Pub, then in use as the old post office and shops. Number 8 is the signal box, next to the level crossing. This area was the town square in ancient times. Number 9 is placed on Ye Old Town Tea and Dining Rooms, or the Galleon restaurant, opposite which is Juniper's cottage. Number 10 is Cook's Place, in use at this time as Ye Cosy Cafe. Number 11 is the Customs House, and is a useful landmark when placing the vanished buildings. And finally, number 12 is the Crown Inn facing Lee Strand. In part 2 of the Old Town High Street East, we will look more closely at the history of Lee Strand and sadly discuss more vanished Tudor properties. We will cover in more detail the coming of the railway, explaining the up and down platform system and why there is a station road in Upper Lee that was never home to a station. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe and share this video if you enjoyed it.